You're listening to the Cantina Cast, your home for thought-provoking Star Wars talk. Join Albert and Jonesy in breaking down the latest news, trailers, movies, and of course, your favorite characters from a galaxy far, far away.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Cantina Cast. My name is Albert Padilla, and this is episode 549, our breakdown, our full breakdown of The Living Force, the most recent novel by John Jackson Miller, a book that we have not stopped talking about, honestly, since we received the advanced reader copies, and thank you to Del Rey for doing that. But Lauren and I have been talking about this. I know Lauren's already had a chance to talk about this during her kind of non-spoiler and spoiler reviews, but this is going to be a further discussion, a deeper discussion, and really just two people geeking out about a book that we both really, really enjoyed. And with me, of course, is Lauren. Lauren, welcome to the show. How are you doing tonight?
Thank you. I'm so good. I'm so excited to finally talk about this. I've been waiting. Also, there's a lot of things that I'm looking forward to talking about with you that I didn't get a chance to mention in my review because I had to recognize eventually that my review could not be 4 hours long. So tonight we'll spend 4 hours long talking,
Yeah.
which is great.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we were talking before we came on the air. This is one of those books that it's so dense. There is so much to talk about. I mean, everything from the big moments, but then lots and lots of little great moments as well that honestly, like it feels like you're part of an exclusive club if you read this. That's how I've been feeling lately. If you've read this book, there's so many little things that you want to talk about that outside of the context of someone who's read the book probably don't really make a lot of sense or don't seem as funny or as cute or as endearing or sincere. But you just kind of have to been there. You have to have been there. You have to have read it to really fully appreciate it in a lot of ways. And that's I think that's a good thing, especially for a book of this sort. So before we get into all that, I want to say thank you to all of our Patreon members. If you guys head out to cantinacast.com/Patreon, you can sign up there for as little as $2 and get all the backlog of stuff. We do at least one show a week for Patreon members exclusively. But special thank you to, first off, Danny, who upgraded to now part of the tribe. So thank you so much for upgrading to the now part of the tribe group. And the rest of those members are Rob, Mike Borda, Lauren, thank you, Lauren, Dante, Riss Bayless, Justin, Jackson, Sharkman Dan, Daz, Isabella, Uncle Leon, Josh C, Jacob, and Reader Reborn. And then to our top tier, which are our Delusions of Grandeur members, which are Rod, CJ, Alex, Steve, and Das. Thank you guys so much for all of your patronage. It certainly helps keep the show going. Also want to say thank you to anybody that's going to join us for the live stream tonight. We've already got a few people in here. And hey, you know what? If you hadn't had a chance to read the book and, you know, this isn't something you're going to pick up, stay with us. We're going to spoil just a lot of stuff. We'll have kind of an initial non-spoiler initial thoughts type thing, and then we'll get into all the details and talk about all the stuff here a little bit later. So this is your chance to turn around if you don't want the spoilers, but you know, if you've had a chance to read it and you don't care, I think you'll find a lot of good stuff in here. So,
And we'll give another spoiler warning, won't we, too, after we give our general thoughts.
Cut me off if we don't, but yes, I plan to give another one.
I'll try to not get carried away. So yeah.
And if you're new to the show, head out to cantinacast.com/YouTube or youtube.com/cantinacast. Either way will get you there. Please like, subscribe, comment as well down in the comment section here of the video if you'd like, and we'll try to get to some answers there or just provide feedback however you'd like. So I'd love to hear what other people are thinking. I tend to live in these like bubbles, honestly, in these echo chambers, and I'm okay with that because I've actually curated those purposely because I don't want to hear all the idiots out there. But, you know, I want to hear what other people think about it. And I would say, generally speaking, even people that are, you know, maybe you're not as familiar with this era of Star Wars or even John Jackson Miller, because it's been 10 years, I think, it's been a while since he's done a book. But yeah, I think overwhelmingly, this has been a huge, huge positive response to the book. So I am curious to hear what other people think about it as well. So cantinacast.com/YouTube to sign up for it. Okay, let's get into our non-spoiler initial thoughts. And I know you've already kind of covered this, but for, I guess, since we're doing this on kind of like the flagship show, give me your initial non-spoiler thoughts. I think I know them all, but you might surprise me.
It's probably a repeat for you, but yes, I loved this book. That's all I've been saying is I loved this book. For me, it really captured the feeling of the prequels while giving a story that felt really fresh. And we got to know a lot of the members of the Jedi Council in a way that we haven't really gotten to know them before. So it felt kind of like coming back to my favorite era of Star Wars, but in a new way. So that was awesome. So loved that. I loved the tone of this story. I love it that the Jedi are the good guys. They're doing the best they can. They're really trying to help people. That really spoke to me a lot. And I loved the spiritual question that Qui-Gon raises to the rest of the Jedi Council as well in this book. That was another thing that really just made it as great as it was the fact that Qui-Gon is confronting them. We need to be more aware of the living force and make this more of a priority. And this shows all of the Jedi Masters really trying to do that and trying to incorporate into their lives as Jedi. And so I just thought that that was just a really cool concept.
Yeah. And just I'll get into my initial thoughts. I have a lot of them, so I'm just going to preface that right now, as you know, you probably come to expect now. But the way this is going to work is we'll do our initial thoughts. Then we're going to break down the book by parts. The book is broken up into 4 parts, so we'll go through each part, kind of wax some of the things that we liked about it here and there, and then we'll end on talking about the actual characters. So the Jedi Council, as well as the rest of the characters, both the antagonist, protagonist that we see throughout the book, because I think that's where the fun's going to be. Because again, there's just all these really cool moments that exist with all of them. So there's already a question: who's your favorite council member in the book? I already know what that answer is without a doubt. But let's tag that in there. We'll put that in notes, and definitely maybe we can end on that one. Okay, so my initial thoughts, I guess non-spoiler thoughts, is number one, I'm with you. Like, this book was a breath of fresh air. That's not to take anything away from, the state of where the Jedi are and in the High Republic, or even with some of the stuff that we've been seeing with the Acolyte. But I have seen a lot, like, it just feels like people are piling on the Jedi Council in a way that I don't think that's really what they were. Like, to your point, they are the good guys. They are the quintessential knights in shining armor. They are the selfless people, and those people still exist during this time. They just got caught up in the Republic, and this book does a really good job of painting them in a much more positive light, and not really painting them as the institution, right? That's got a very negative connotation. Not to say that, and I'm not taking anything away from the Acolyte. Like, we'll probably see that maybe that uses a negative connotation during the Acolyte, and I think I'm okay with that. But by the time we get to this group here, they aren't the bad guys at all. And this book goes to great lengths to ensure that you don't think any one of these guys is bad. And even the ones that are rough, you definitely walk away thinking, hey, that guy is pretty cool. And I think that does a really good job, which is my next talking point. To your point again, also, it gives us insight into characters that I normally had never really thought of. Like, a lot of the Jedi Council prior to this book were just people, similar to what the Clone Wars was. And, what that did for, Attack of the Clones and that sort of thing. This really enriches the Jedi Council characters in a way that I had never really even thought. I don't know that I even cared so much about the Jedi Council members until this book. And now going back, and I've not had a chance to do this yet, but I'm waiting to go back to watch the Phantom Menace and the prequels and see what that did to recontextualize my experience and my relationship with the Jedi Council, because I have a completely and totally, utterly different opinion and outlook about who each one is and their personalities and stuff. And that's a credit to John Jackson Miller, because every one of them is so unique and in very cool ways that I'd never, really even considered. So, okay, a couple other things here. Just the idea of Qui-Gon challenging the council, and we're going to get into the synopsis here in just a second. Lauren's going to do that for us. But the Jedi challenging the council to, live in the now. Right? Stop thinking about the future. The same lesson he tells Obi-Wan during episode 1 is what he challenges the council to do. And putting them in that position and them responding to Qui-Gon in the way they did, it's a really great, it's a very good feeling. And this is the only thing that I'll spoil, because it's very minor. But at one moment, one of the Jedi Council members says, "What would Qui-Gon do?" And that line stood out to me, because it's a testament to just how wonderful Qui-Gon is. And we all know this. We all love him. We all talk about him all the time, right? But to see the other Jedi Council members, and this wasn't just, somebody new on the council. This was somebody that was a prominent figure on the Jedi Council. And to think that they think that way about him and put him in that light was absolutely just, I don't know, reaffirming to me about everything that I feel for Qui-Gon Jinn. So I really enjoyed that. Let me see if I got any other ones that I can say without spoiling. Oh, and then just the other thing is just going back to what I said about them being the good guys. This is a reminder of earlier times when the Jedi were more meditation and bureaucracy, and what they, that's what they are now. They're not meditation; they're more bureaucracy. And we get to see examples of that and kind of what they're doing, leading up to the events of the Phantom Menace, and just pulling back that curtain, getting that insight into what was really kind of going on at the time, and then understanding just like, okay, if that's what they were doing, this all starts to make a lot more sense. Now, not that it didn't, but it just makes even more sense about how Palpatine was able to manipulate the Republic, manipulate the Jedi Order, work his way in. That's an undertone of the book. It's there and you can see it, and there's kind of like red flags and warning signs throughout, but it's not in your face. That's not really technically what the book is about, until the very end. But for the most part,
I think that was just a little treat.
It was a treat. Oh my gosh, I can't wait to talk about that little treat. But for the most part, it's there. That's not what the point of the book. It really is about just helping people, which is what Qui-Gon's challenge was. So I think that's all I'll say. I have a lot more thoughts on this stuff here in just one second, but just this concept of help one person was really cool. So
yeah.
All right. Do you want to add anything to what I said there, or do you want to jump right into our the part one synopsis, or I don't know? Do you have an overall synopsis that you want to do, or do you want to break it down by the books or by the chapters and stuff?
Well, I will say, to answer your first question, I could add more, but I feel like if I add more, then I'm getting into like the rest of the book, so I will withhold. But I guess now I can give my full summary. Do you want me to give a full summary of the book first and like 2 minutes, and then we go into part one?
2 minutes. Yeah. You got 2 minutes starting now.
Okay. So spoiler warning. I am now going to start talking spoilers for anybody who doesn't want spoilers. So goodbye.
Rob's out.
Goodbye, no non-spoiler people. I understand you. I would be leaving right now too. Okay. So basically, this book opens up with Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan are on a commercial ship traveling. And what they were just doing was overseeing the closure of a Jedi outpost. And this is something that's been going on a lot, is the Republic has been making the decision to close Jedi outposts throughout this portion of space called the Slice. And when Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon are on this ship, there's 3 hijackers that attempt to take the ship, and Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan stop them. And right after this, that's when all the people on the ship are complaining to Qui-Gon about just the conditions of life in the Slice ever since the Jedi started closing the outposts. And they're like, the Jedi don't help people like they used to. They have all these concerns as a result, and there's really not a lot of opportunity in this area anymore. And so that's when Qui-Gon is like, we need to do something about this. And he confronts the Jedi Council about this, gives a big speech explaining why they need to focus more on this. And this is something we'll go into more detail on when we start talking about the individual sections. But ultimately, they agree that Qui-Gon has a point, and they are all going to go to Quen, which is a planet that they're considering closing an outpost on next. And they're like, well, let's talk to the people in person, kind of evaluate the situation. And so all of the council members go together, which is a big deal for them to all go. They commemorate the bicentennial anniversary of the outpost's opening, so they have a big ceremony, make a big deal. And while they're there, they do get to know some of the people of Quen. And this turns into like a super positive thing where they're being super helpful for people. Meanwhile, the other plot line of the story is we also have Deepa Balaba is undercover on assignment monitoring pirate activity. And this is something that this pirate activity that she's monitoring ends up interfering with the ceremony on Quen. So that's kind of where we see these two plot lines intersect. And all of the Jedi have to come together to defeat these pirates on Quen while also taking care of their new friends that they made. And thanks to all of this going down, all of the new friends, the Jedi being there and doing their best, they end up defeating the pirates on Quen. It's really good for Quen. The Jedi really make a difference on this planet. And the trip ultimately ends up being a success.
Mm-hmm.
So that's your very short summary, of which I am leaving out a ton of details, but
Of course.
yeah.
Yeah, and so let me give you some, I guess, some more kind of initial thoughts before we get into the individual parts of the book. So one thing that I really enjoyed about it was the use of the Sabak cards and all the analogies that was used. It's kind of a through line through all of this, and particularly with one of the characters. The antagonist name is Zalastra. I'm not sure where the A is on that one, or Zill, I think is how I've got her mostly in my notes. But
Me too.
she's the antagonist, and there's a whole backstory with the cards and stuff that we may or may not get into. But a lot of the moves, like Idiot's Array, and you know, the strategy that goes into playing Sabak is used throughout all of this, because this is how she thinks. She thinks of this as one massive Sabak game. I thought that was really neat. I don't know. I'd love to we got to get John Jackson Miller on the show, by the way. I'm going to reach out to him and see if we can get him on here to do an interview. But I do want to know just kind of what the inspiration was for that. But I did enjoy it, and it's not heavy handed. You know, it is kind of spread out throughout the book, even to the very end, actually, which I just thought that was a really kind of neat thing to weave into this book.
It almost feels like she kind of uses them like tarot cards in a way.
She does. She absolutely does. I mean, I think at one point she flips one over and she looks at the card and somehow she determines something from that card, right?
Right. Yeah.
Which is an interesting way to interpret that. But you know, again, there's some significance with the cards there that we may get into a little bit later. I like I have this. I posted this today just a while ago here on social media. But at one point, again, this is getting trivial, but again, you had to be there. There are these suitcases that ignite, or these suitcases that open on voice command. And there's a moment in here where Zill kind of backstabs a number of other gang members trying to take, you know, power. And the command that's issued was Wookiee Spoon Turbo Lightning Demise, which I think is the coolest name ever. But again, if I said that, you wouldn't know what the hell I was talking about unless you read the book. So I'm just throwing that out there as a really kind of trivial one, but I did enjoy that.
There were so many great jokes in this book. Like the comedic timing of some of the scenes was just fantastic. Like this book, I was actually like laughing for real, sitting on my couch reading it at certain scenes.
Yeah, and part of it is like, okay, so you've got the Idiot's Array is how I've got them kind of labeled, right? You've got these three thugs that you mentioned at the very beginning, and we'll talk more about them.
Yeah.
But every moment of them, especially when they're on screen especially when they're in scene with Qui-Gon or Zill, I mean, it's just comedy gold, and how they're like mistreated and they don't even realize it half the time. They're so dumb, right? It's absolutely hysterical. But then the other part was the one that I was never expecting. And that was the exchange between anytime you had Yarrow Poof on there.
Yes.
And you can move in, like Ki-Adi-Mundi was in there at times, but then also Oppo Rancisis. When those three got together, it was
my God.
I don't know. It was some of the most hysterical things because they're so different and they're so out of touch at times with the common people that and they would make fun of each other the entire time. And, you know, it was just kind of what they did. But that's again where it really put those characters in a different light. And I really love them now because of this book. I couldn't have really cared much about them. I would say Oppo Rancisis I've really started to like a lot more because of what happened during the High Republic. With Lorna D, right, and how he kind of befriended her and all that. I mean, that got me really hooked. But this book did a lot to take that honestly to the next level. But yeah, you're right. The comedy in this was so cool. Like throughout of it, there was just moments when you didn't expect. You were laughing almost hysterically at times of some of the stuff that was being said, or just Obi-Wan's, you know, attitude as usual about
his little
things.
Quips. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
And
good stuff.
okay, I'm glad you mentioned Yariel Poof because I feel like he is one of my favorite characters now, and I never thought I would say that, but based on this book, he totally is. Like he's just completely won me over.
There's a moment where Ki-Adi-Mundi is wearing like horns on his head, and you imagine his head is like this big cone thing, and then it's shooting horns out of it. I mean, just the visual alone from that. I mean, you can't. The other moment that stood out to me, we're just talking about funny moments now, and I was going to save this for Ki-Adi-Mundi's kind of character discussion, but him buying a snow cone
and wants no flavor
was the funniest thing in the world. Like, I mean, you would never have thought this. And like this is here's what I would say about the book too. So I know we're kind of scatterbrained now because we're just
Yeah,
gushing
now
over the
we're
book.
just talking about our fave moments.
I know. This was gonna happen. I was like, we're just gonna be fangirling the entire time. The one thing I would say about this book too, and this is Jonesy and I were kind of talking about this earlier. This book is probably, in all fairness, and this is not a criticism, in all fairness, this is not one of those books that you're going to pick up and you're going to get really deep into the Jedi mythology and and lightsaber combat and the use of the Force, right? That's not this book. This book is really taking the Jedi and it's almost humanizing them in a way that we've never had done before. We get bits and pieces of that humanization happening, I think, in the High Republic, which I think is what really kind of resonates with me in a lot of ways, and seeing just how good they are and how they are so selfless at times for the common folk. But there's even during the High Republic, they're doing these incredible things at a very macro level, right? They're saving the galaxy, the entire galaxy, or whole sectors of the galaxy at a time, which is great. It's very selfless. But here you have a very humanization of it where it's now down to a very micro level. It really is at an individual level for each one of these. It almost depowers the Jedi in a way, and in a good way too. Like I think about like comic book characters, and some of my favorite comic book characters that I've always liked, like Spider-Man. One of the reasons I've liked Spider-Man is because he starts off as a teenager, and I can relate to that. He's got flaws, and I see them apparent all the time. And it's easy to really connect with that character because they're not, yeah, they have the superpowers, but then they also kind of can be grounded too. And this really grounds the Jedi in a way that I don't think we've ever seen. And that translates into the book, right? For us as the readers, appreciating the art that's here, the same thing is happening to the people in the book. They're starting to relate to the Jedi in a way that they didn't even think was possible or felt like the Jedi could even do, because they were suddenly down here as, you know, being servant leaders and being at the grassroots level and doing very, minor things that seem very insignificant to most people, but really meant a lot to these people individually in their personal lives, right? And that was the whole point here, right? So living in the moment, helping one person at a time kind of thing. That was the part that, you know, again, these little bits and moments that we were just talking about with like the snow cones and all that stuff. It's just things that you would never expected to have seen with the Jedi. So I know I've kind of rambled on there, but what else?
Well, yeah, and one thing I wanted to add to what you're saying is, so you're right that we don't get any big mythology, like big larger than life stuff, but we do still get a lot of discussion about what is the will of the Force, what does the Force actually want of us, and how should we as Jedi actually respond to that. And that's ultimately with the conclusion that well, some of them more than others, but that's ultimately what the book is about, is that being active in people's day-to-day lives and helping people when you see an opportunity to help someone in the now, which is the living Force that Qui-Gon is talking about. That's a huge part of what the Force wants of you and your duty as a Jedi that just easily gets overlooked. And this book is them kind of getting back in touch with that side of being a Jedi. So while there's not that larger than life, big, lightsaber wielding crazy stuff, there's still so much in this book about what it means to be a Jedi, just in a different way than the glorious stuff.
Yeah. And that's not to say that there aren't moments. I mean, we have, like, again, one of the coolest moments, and we didn't really get to see it or read about it much, but the idea, if you've ever thought, what would it look like if Yoda and Yaddle suddenly were fighting together with their lightsabers? What would that look like? You got that moment in this book. And there are other moments in there that were, very action oriented, but that's not really what this book's about. I mean, yeah, there's a big kind of explosion thing going on at the very end, a big kind of climactic thing that all kind of builds up to, and it works really well. But it's almost like the common people have as much of a role in this, the success of that battle as the Jedi did, similar to the Ewoks. I'm not gonna say they're exactly the same, but like these common folk were able to make a difference and help the Jedi kind of swing the tide of this big kind of cataclysmic event that was probably going to happen there. Not really cataclysmic, but certainly a huge event that was supposed to happen there at the very end. I just want to throw this out there too. I know I've talked about this a lot on this show and especially on Patreon. I've always been into Boy Scouting, and scouting is a huge part of my life. It's really changed my life in a lot of different ways. there is the Boy Scout slogan is "Do a good turn daily," and what that means is every day you should do something for someone. And I could not help but read this book and see what all these Jedi were going through, and not think that they were doing their good turns. And I've always said this too, like the Jedi are like the Boy Scouts of the galaxy. They're the Knights of the galaxy, and this was more prevalent in this book in what they were doing at that level than anything I had ever seen before. Let me see. Thematically, I just want to talk about this too, since we're kind of in spoilers at this point. Thematically, the idea of attachments plays a huge role in this. And I think probably going back to what we said, where they're not talking about, Jedi combat or the use of force powers, that idea, that concept of attachments plays a pretty big role in this. We get to see that, especially I think with like Mace Windu and Deepa Billaba, right? His former Padawan, and just how maybe he was or wasn't attached. There's a great conversation a little bit later that comes up on it. And I want to point this out. We'll talk about Kyla here in just a second, but she's a 12-year-old girl, plays a massive role. She's one of the main characters throughout the book, even to the very end. And at one point, her and Deepa are having a conversation about attachments. And she says it. She says, "I don't think I want to trust the judgment of anyone who isn't tied to other people." Her words hung in the room for several moments. I mean, that literally stunned Deepa to think about it. I could put her on her heels to think about that. But if you think about it, that's really kind of where this is coming from. And the book does a good job of saying, like, hey, it's okay to have attachments, right? You can not have attachments. That's the whole point of this, right? And I think that's where I think there's when we get to, prior to maybe this book and some of the more recent stuff that's come out, when you look and you kind of interpret and you analyze Revenge of the Sith and what Anakin he went to the extreme, right? He absolutely went to the extreme. But there's nothing really wrong with attachments, I think, and that's what Kyla was trying to say here is like, you kind of have to have an attachment, right? You kind of have to want to help people, and going ahead and seeing that through for that one person is okay. It's not always a one size fits all. The needs of the few outweigh the needs of the many. That doesn't always work. That's not a good, you shouldn't subscribe to that holistically all the time.
Well, and Qui-Gon had a really good point about that as well near the end of the book, where he's talking about how there's certain things that the Jedi have to be aware of because of their role, but the Force itself, that doesn't mean that the Force itself doesn't want anyone to have any attachments.
Right.
And I felt like that was a really good distinction, because I feel like a lot of times it gets misinterpreted that all attachments are bad, but really it's the message. I mean, I've always interpreted the real teaching is be compassionate towards people, but if, be also willing to let people go, which is where Anakin messed up. And I felt like Qui-Gon's distinction of, there's a difference between what's expected of a Jedi and what the Force actually wills for the universe at large. So I thought that was a really cool point made.
Yes, it reinforces that point quite a bit, actually. Okay, so I've got other thoughts that I'll just continue to kind of chime in as we go on. But why don't we get into kind of, let's talk about each of the parts. So again, the book is broken up into 4 parts. Part 1 is fairly short. I would say probably maybe a fourth of the book. Part 2 is probably about a 4. Part 3 is like the longest one. It takes up the majority of the book. And then you have a very small section, I think of only like 3 chapters that make up part 4. But why don't we talk about those, and then we'll get into the character discussions.
Okay, cool. So starting with part 1. So this is when Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon, they are traveling on the Regal Voyager, which is a commercial ship that people travel on. So they're on the ship with a bunch of people. And this is when they have 3 hijackers who come on the ship. And these guys are, as we've mentioned, these guys are idiots. They are the leader of these 3 hooligans is named the Lobber. And
which we find the origin. His name
we do find
later.
it out later on. But they're just ridiculous. They obviously haven't discussed their plan before they even do this. And Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, without using their lightsabers or anything, they're just able to talk them out of their plan and kind of throw them off. And so when they do that, they end up putting these guys in the empty cargo hold until they're able to drop them off somewhere. But after these guys are taken care of, that's when Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan come back to where all of the rest of the people are on the ship. And Qui-Gon just starts getting bombarded with complaints from people. And some of the complaints, well, a lot of the complaints are understandable, like where these people are coming from, but some of these people are being a little unreasonable in my
Unreasonable,
opinion.
petty, trivial, maybe. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, like there's one part where like people will be complaining about one thing and then Qui-Gon answers their complaint and then they start complaining about his answer. And it's just like these people are kind of, it's a lot that Qui-Gon is having thrown at him. But I was so impressed with Qui-Gon in this scene because he is just so patient with everybody. And he
Mhm.
believes that everybody deserves his patience. And he doesn't lose that. He doesn't lose his cool at all, even though Obi-Wan does lose his cool at one point in this scene and Qui-Gon doesn't. So I just loved that.
Can I chime in just 1 second?
Yeah.
Obi-Wan acknowledges, he at one point he says, I lack the common touch, meaning he's not able to connect with the common folk, right? And the lesson that you were just talking about, or maybe it's not necessarily a lesson, but what Qui-Gon tells Obi-Wan is that every being is your better, Obi-Wan. Remember that, and services come second nature. I think that was a great for Obi-Wan to hear. I think he continues to struggle with that. I think throughout, as he continues to grow up, right, we can kind of see it, and that's the arrogance, the confidence that we see in Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Mm-hmm.
But I just love that he again, it goes back to that servant leadership. It goes back to washing the feet of someone else, right? If you want to get into the religious aspects,
Get a
of it all.
biblical reference in there.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just great. I mean, he's just so in
Yeah.
touch, and again, all the reasons why we love him are definitely throughout this book.
Yeah. So that was just like one more point for Qui-Gon in that scene, just his patience and his compassion for everyone, no matter what. And so after this, he's like, okay, this is a problem. We need to talk to the council about this. And so when they go back to Coruscant, they have to go to Coruscant to handle some administrative stuff from the outpost that just closed. So they're going to Coruscant anyway. And while they're there, Qui-Gon's like, okay, I need to petition the council. So the council all gets together, which is complicated for them to all meet, but he's luckily there when they're having a meeting. And he gives a big speech and petitions to them like, we need to focus more on the living force. He talks about how they've kind of dropped the ball on this for these people to be going through what they're going through in the slice. And at first, there's a little bit of debate amongst the council where some of them kind of feel like they're already doing everything they can. Others see Qui-Gon's point, but ultimately they all come around and are like, okay, yeah, let's work on this more. And this is when Mace Windu presents the opportunity for them to go to Quinn and kind of try to put this in practice. And the significance of Quinn is that they're considering closing this outpost. This is like the next one on the list that the Chancellor wants them to close. Chancellor Valorum at this point. But it's a big deal if they close this one because it's been open for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
And when it was first opened, it was a big deal that they opened it. It was this big project called the Grand Renewal where they restored the environment on Quinn. It was like a massive undertaking that they did at the time. So if they close this one, it's saying a lot.
Yeah.
So they're like, okay, we need to go to Quinn.
The optics of it closing would be significant.
Exactly. Yeah. So they're all like, let's all go to Quinn, which is another big deal for them to all put down what they're doing and go. And they're going to have a big ceremony for the bicentennial anniversary. And they're also going to try to get to know some of the people, talk to them, and evaluate in person if they should actually close this or not. And so that's the decision that they make. And pretty much what becomes the slogan of the trip is the Jedi stand with you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the message that they're wanting to send the people of Quinn. And then also in part one, at the same time, we have Deepa Balaba is undercover on assignment, and she is trying to get into a pirate gang called the Rift Walkers, who is headed by Zalastra, who we've mentioned earlier. And she's pretending to be like a speeder hijacker. Yeah, named Hotwire.
Hotwire. Sorry. Just like the name.
And the way that her in is she starts working as Kyla, the 12-year-old girl. She starts working as Kyla's bodyguard. And that's kind of like her first sort of attempt to get into the Riftwalkers. That's sort of like her opening. But so that's pretty much where the end of part one leaves us.
All right, so let me first talk about something that Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan did. It was very interesting. And I love the way John Jackson Miller did this. So you think about it, you got to figure out a way to kind of introduce reintroduce all the council members. And he does this by Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan. He sends Obi-Wan basically to every one of the council members. And so, and what he's doing is they're making kind of small talk, but at the same time, he's like, hey, I don't know if you've heard, but we would really like to get the council together. And he goes around and tells every single one of those. So it's almost like a foregone conclusion that they have to, because they'd all have it in their head now, right? He's almost suggesting it to every one of them individually without telling them that they've gone already and spoken to everybody individually. And it's almost, and I don't know if maybe I picked up on this a wrong way, but it felt like the council was not meeting as much, or it was so irregular that they were meeting that Qui-Gon was trying to force, no pun intended, was trying to force them to regroup because they kind of fell apart. They really hadn't been meeting as much as they should. Did you kind of pick that up as well?
So what I picked up was that they don't meet often because it is complicated to get them all together, but that other than just Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon pressuring them, I thought that there was a mention that they need to meet anyway. Like, yeah, we kind of do have some stuff we need to talk about. So we probably, yeah, it is time for us to meet. So maybe Obi-Wan like planted the seed perhaps, but they
Yeah.
were like, yeah, we've got some things we need to talk about. Cause I remember at the beginning of the meeting, there were some other things that they were addressing before it was Qui-Gon's turn, and he had to wait a while before he goes in there.
Yeah.
So it could just be that Obi-Wan was kind of the last sort of, the last
Right.
push.
The last nudge, the subtle
Yeah.
nudge to get him in there. I kind of credit Qui-Gon for doing that. So the before we get into the Zoom meeting that happens, by the way, when they all finally get together,
Yeah.
the one thing that it really did was it not only reintroduced us to the Jedi Council members, but we got to see what they were doing, how they were drowning in all the bureaucratic duties that they had now had. And I want to kind of touch on these, even though this is more of a character moment, I guess, more than anything, because I did find these super fascinating and interesting. So, like Yaddle, right? Yaddle was suddenly doing legal work. I mean, she was all intents and purposes like a lawyer of sorts, and she wasn't necessarily helping other people. She was kind of defending. I mean, it talked about how she was defending Jedi, and there was an interesting concept. This doesn't really come up much in the book, but it is kind of more trivial or trivia that I found interesting. That the Jedi can operate kind of under this blanket of almost like the police, right? They really can't do. Excuse me. They really can't do anything wrong, and if something does go wrong, Yaddle is the one that represents them. Right? She's kind of an attorney for them and defending them whenever they need. I think the example was somebody like one of the Jedi accidentally ignited his lightsaber and it killed someone else, right? But they can't really hold a Jedi accountable for that, and she's the one that goes up and defends them. That's probably the more glorified one. You have everything from that to somebody like Plo Koon and Tion Ceci, who are kind of like they're basically mechanics, right? They're spending their time as
Well, and
grease
Stacey 10
monkeys.
seems like he wants to be a
Well,
mechanic.
and he's really good at it from what we
Yeah.
understand. Yeah. But like Plo Koon, like as amazing of a combat warrior that he is, he's out here, turning wrenches and a grease monkey for the most part.
And then you have Addie Gallia being a secretary, pretty
much
Yeah.
to Yoda and to Falorum and to Palpatine, who made a
Mhm.
sneak appearance here at the very beginning, at the very end. About that scene, real quick, I just want to highlight this too. I'll see if I can pull it up in my notes real quick. But there's a moment when it's like the most boring thing, because you think about Valorum, and I forget the actor's name right now. Alex will probably bail me out because he played it was in Superman. But the actor, you think about his voice and the way he played Valorum. But they're in there and they're talking at one point about like boots, like
Yeah.
some company had sent this. And actually, this in all seriousness, this kind of plays into where the Jedi are from a status perspective, they're almost like a symbol or a celebrity of sorts. But there is some world or whatever, and they had made these boots, and these boots were like red.
And they're
And
hideous.
They're
yeah.
hideous, right? And they wanted the Jedi to start wearing these boots because they felt like, hey, the Jedi are these prominent people, like that everybody sees and holds in high regard, and
They wanted them to be influencers. for
influencers.
these
That's the word I was
foods.
looking for. That's
Yeah.
exactly what it was. They were being seen as influencers in the galaxy. That should say a whole lot about where they shouldn't be, right? As Jedi and certainly the Council.
Well, and that scene was very revealing because not only is there that whole thing with the boots, but it's a meeting between Valorum, Palpatine, who is a senator at this point, which I think is important, because you can still see he's kind of manipulating Valorum too, even though he's just a senator. So Valorum, Palpatine, Yoda, and Adigalia, they're all in this meeting together, and Valorum and Palpatine are just asking the dumbest things of the Jedi. The boots is only one of those things. Like
That's
another
true.
of those things is like, oh, this planet is losing tourism revenue because of a labor dispute. They're down 0.05% or like something
Right.
like just completely trivial. And they're like, can y'all go like handle this? That shouldn't be the Jedi's job, but they're
Yes.
putting that pressure on them to handle these ridiculous things. Like there's one point when the council's meeting and someone comments like, oh, next they'll have us settling parking tickets. So they're just sending the Jedi to do things that are just not their job and completely thinning out the Jedi's resources, which of course Palpatine is doing on
Yes.
purpose.
Yep.
That's pretty much the hint you get in the scene, is that Palpatine is influencing Valorum to do this. So it is all part of his plan that they're just getting spread really thin right now.
What? Just another funny part when they're talking, and I'll get into the rest of what I was just mentioning, but another funny part about those shoes is they're telling this to Yoda and Adi, right? About the shoes and then wanting to wear the shoes. And Yoda at one point says, I am knowledgeable of many things, but I have never worn shoes. Which I was thinking that'd be hilarious to actually see them run around with Jedi robes and red shoes. But there's a little bit at the very end of that chapter. I think this is in chapter 5, very early on. Adi she very quietly turns to Palpatine, because Valorum's like really boring everybody in the room, right? I mean, he's just a boring character in general. But Adi turns to Palpatine. She says, why is the shade of blue? Like his room is like a shade of blue.
He's like made the entire room blue.
It's like, like
It's
gaudy
like ugly,
and awkward.
Yeah.
And Palpatine responds back, there's no accounting for taste, Palpatine whispered. I sometimes wonder what it would look like in red. And I thought,
that was a good line.
That was good, because that's foreshadowing, and it's really not important, but I thought I loved it.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and that was something I actually appreciated about this book, is that this book is not about Palpatine.
No.
But we
It's
do
not.
see his presence, because you can't not see his presence. It would be weird if there was just absolutely nothing. But the book isn't about him. We just get a little hint that he's there. He's working on what he's doing. But the plot is really about the Jedi themselves, which I thought was a really nice way that was incorporated.
Sorry, let me go back to the again, I knew this was going to happen. Let me get back to kind of where everybody was, because let's see, who else did we had? We had so Kia, was it Yaro Poof and Oppo that were the trainers? Is that right? Do I have that right?
It was Yarl Poof and Ki-Adi-Mundi.
Ki-Adi-Mundi. They were trainers.
Yeah.
So they were doing, what you would expect, I guess, Jedi to do. There was an interesting scene there where I think Oppo was kind of using, like, he was known to be to be able to influence people with the Force. And I think at one point he influences his students to kind of protect him when Ki-Adi went to go attack them. And Ki-Adi-Mundi actually had a problem with this. Like, he felt like this was really not the right way to go, kind of thing, that you should really, should not do something like that. So there was a dispute. And I think it was One Up had mentioned that as well, or in the comments a little bit earlier as well. There was, he says, there are some good bits about some of the abilities, like Jarl's use of the Jedi mind trick, and how using the Force to extend your life is a crime of the highest order or something.
Yeah.
There's almost, at one point, there is that kind of moral debate about whether or not you can or should do that, right? Should you use the Force to kind of preserve life and preserve your life? I think we talked about Tion, Sensi. Who am I missing here? Was that everybody? Did we talk about everyone? And they're kind of, I want to just cover their menial job that they were doing before we get into like, the rest of the.
Yeah, I think those are all the people that we meet in part 1.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me see. We talked about Yoda. Windu. Let me just really talk about Windu, at least early on. Oh, we talked about Eth Koth. Oh my gosh. All right. So Eth was in the very beginning as well, and he was kind of, again, another clerical job. Like, when they were shutting down, when they were shutting down like the Jedi temples, and they had all the artifacts and everything that was in there, his job was to inventory this stuff.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that's what he had been reduced to. Like, he's not out there, preaching the Force and doing really great works. He's sitting there with a pen and paper, so to speak, and taking tabs on, okay, we got one book. We have one chair. We have one whatever, just taking inventory of this stuff. Like, it's just weird. And again, all playing into Palpatine's, plans, larger plans.
He's the first stop that Qui-Gon has to make once they get to Coruscant, after closing the last outpost. Qui-Gon has to stop and visit him and be like, okay, here's the stuff that we recovered from the outpost. So yeah, it's just like, he's just like an administrative assistant right now.
Yes. And then later on, when they finally get everybody together, because they don't actually visit Evan Peel. By the way, have you been calling him this whole time?
I pronounce everybody's name different than what you're saying.
That's totally fine. And I need to go. I can't. I should have went back and watched Clone Wars, because some of these characters do pop up in the Clone Wars series, and that's the right way.
Some of their names are never said, or maybe they're said in the Clone Wars series, but in the movies, a lot of these people's names are not said out loud.
Said out loud.
So it's like, if you've just been reading their names, then you might pronounce them differently. So that's okay. We all know who we're talking about.
And neither one of us do audiobooks, so I don't know what they're saying in the audiobooks.
Yeah, it's a free for all with our pronunciation. I still call him Even Peel. I can't
Even Peel. It sounds like even keeled, but maybe that's not what you're.
Yeah, that's just how it's going to come out. So It's fine. It's too late.
Evan Peel is when he joins the Zoom meeting, he's on Holo, right? And he's settling an agricultural dispute between two companies. Like, they got him chasing these, like you said earlier, issues that have nothing to do with anything outside of business, corporates. And this comes up a little bit later from Palpatine, honestly, and we'll get into that here at the very end of the book, the very, very end of the epilogue. We get that. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of, again, they're being stretched and they're doing these things. So I just want to kind of set the frame for like where the Jedi are. And it's kind of sad to see that that's what they're doing, right? That this is what they've been relegated to, given, just how incredible they really are. Let's see. So I want to talk, when they have the meeting, I did like that it was Mace Windu that was the one that said, hey, you know what? We're going to go and take this one step further. We're not just going to go meet with everybody, the common folk, and help one person. We're going to do this collectively as a group. I mean, it is essentially a business leadership trip, right? They're going somewhere and they're going to go do this. And at the time, like I said, the festival really wasn't in scope. That wasn't really what they were going there for. Eventually kind of turned into that, and that kind of became one of the primary focuses once they were there on Quinn. But yeah, it was really just to take them all out on this field trip and get out there with the common folk. And it was, and we're not there yet, but just, it was interesting to see how awkward it was for some of them and how out of place they felt doing some of these things, even though you would think a Jedi of all people would be somebody who would be very naturally, gifted in doing some of this stuff. That certainly wasn't the case with a lot of them.
A lot of them are out of practice because they've just been chilling in the temple for a long time.
Let's see. So we are introduced, like you said, in this one for Zill. Let's talk about the idiots array real quick. So this is the Lobber, Gore, and Wungo. I don't know. I forgot the races already. I think the Lobber is what's his name? Oh, I forgot the freaking name. But the point of those guys, every time they were on screen, I think we said this early on, but every time they're on the page, especially with Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon Jinn, they are trying to be the bad guys, but then you can almost hear Liam Neeson's voice in every single one of the lines, which I loved about the way John Jackson wrote. He wrote Qui-Gon almost to a T, like perfectly lifted off the movie screen and everything. And you could hear you could almost hear the inflection in the way he spoke, right? But it was so funny how fast and how quickly they were able to diffuse these three idiots every single time they were charged with either, fighting Qui-Gon or capturing him or, whatever it is. I mean, they run into these guys like 3 times throughout the book into the very end. And while we're in the discussion of spoilers, they eventually join like the Jedi and the Republic at the very end of the book, which I thought was kind of cool. And honestly, I really want to know like what happened to them. But the fact that to think about that Zill had an opportunity to kill all 3 of these at the very beginning, and had she done that, it would have been a very different story, because they actually end up becoming a foil for her, and the fact that she let them live actually comes back to bite her in the butt in a big way later down the road.
Yeah, they were just, I mean, yeah, they're hilarious when they're on the page, but also the fact that they keep coming back up. It's like, okay, these guys I think they're going to be important later on, even though they're so ridiculous. Because we keep running into them in this book.
And it's literally Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon Jinn who run into them like 3 separate times, the will of
Yeah.
the Force, I guess, is here at play when that happens. But I really enjoyed that. Let's see if I had any other thoughts. I guess on part one. Probably not. I think maybe we can come back to if there's anything else, we can certainly come back here. Oh, hey, we'll say Veers for later.
Okay.
That's a nice little Easter egg. Why don't we
Okay.
move on to part two?
Okay. So part 2, we do have the Jedi are starting to arrive on Quinn. And this is when we start having a lot of little side plots going on. And this was something in my review, I was like, God, I want to talk about all these fun side plots. But this is where it's like, okay, there's a lot that goes on. It gets kind of complex in terms of all these little side stories. But that's part of what makes this book so fun is everybody kind of going off and doing their own thing. But this is kind of where that begins, is they're all arriving on Quen one by one. So we do have Oppo Rencesis gets here, and of course he was part of the Grand Renewal. He was like pretty much the head of that project. We also have Even Peel who gets here, and he runs into these rambunctious kids that are out of school because the school is closed. So they're just running around causing trouble. So he gets involved with them and he's trying to help them out. And we also have Plo Koon and Sazy 10. They arrive. They end up getting involved in a drama with taxi drivers versus droid taxi drivers. We also have Eth Toth, who is working in the Jedi Outpost. He's doing inventory once again, which is a pretty complicated project that he gets kind of sucked into. We also have Kiadi-Mundi, who ends up accidentally giving people couples therapy, which we'll probably talk about more in a minute. We have Yaddle also accidentally becoming the Jedi spokesperson by getting sucked into doing a TV interview. We have, let's see, who else do we have? Meanwhile, Mace and Captain Balo are on the Assurance, which is a Republic ship, but it's not a military ship, but they're in the area waiting for Deepa. So Deepa is still on Kelduin doing her undercover stuff, and Mace is on the Assurance waiting for her. And he's trying to get in touch with her. He can't get in touch with her because, of course, she's undercover. It's not like she can just talk whenever she wants. And him and Captain Balo are really getting on each other's nerves because Captain Balo has a lot of grievances about how the Republic is treating his ship and his crew, and also how he's kind of just expected to do whatever the Jedi want. And that's something that's really frustrating for him. So that's something that really we see a lot of in part 2 is those two trying to figure out how to work together. And then meanwhile, what's going on with Deepa is that she ends up getting in with the Rift Walkers fully. And when she's in with them, Zalastra ends up attacking via Zoom meeting the heads of the other pirate gangs. And what she does is she does kind of like a long con where she's using these cases, which you mentioned earlier, Albert, from the Regal Voyager, that are these security cases that they only open with a passcode. And they're very secure. And so what she does is she has set up the cases to open with her passcode. And what she's been doing in the past is sending them money through these cases. And she's saying, hey, the Regal Voyager is paying all of us to not attack their ships. But really, it's Zalastra that's made this all up as part of her con that she's doing. So they're used to opening these cases and there being money in them. And one thing that she does now is she actually sends them the cases, but this time it's a bomb. And she assassinates all of the heads of the other pirate gangs. And Deepa witnesses this and she tries to stop it. And so she blows her cover as a Jedi. Turns out Zalastra already suspected it anyway, but now Deepa has fully blown her cover. And Zalastra has Deepa in captivity now. She's torturing her, trying to get information. And we find out that Zalastra really, really hates the Jedi on a very personal level because when she was a little kid, she was in an orphanage. And Jedi Master Sifo-Dyas showed up to the orphanage, took 2 of her friends who were force sensitive, left her there by herself, had no compassion for her, didn't try to get her out of the bad situation that she was in. And so she's had a grudge ever since. And so because of that, Deepa ends up realizing that she's probably going to attack all of the other Jedi Masters as well. She's got kind of like a vendetta against Jedi. And pretty much what happens is once it's becoming clear that Zalastra is going to kill Deepa, Kyla, who still cares about Deepa regardless of the fact that she's a Jedi, sends out a transmission. Thank God Qui-Gon just so happens to intercept it as he's going through the area. It was pretty much like a 1 in a million chance that he received it.
It was the will of the Force.
It was the will of the Force for sure. And he is able to inform Mace of the transmission, and Mace and Captain Balo, Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, they all go and save Deepa. And then after that, that's when Deepa tells the Jedi Council, hey, Zalastra's going to come attack all of us. We need to be prepared. And that's pretty much where part 2 takes us, is up to that.
Yeah, it kind of sets the stage for the big, I guess the big battle, which pretty much takes place in all of course, part 3. All right, so let's back up. Let's talk about the Jedi, and this is maybe where we can talk about some of their interactions with the common folk here that they run into. And the cool thing about this, and I think maybe I mentioned it, but just to kind of hit it a little bit harder, I mean, the common folk here really, it's great to see the Jedi interact with all these common people and really get to know their personal strife and complaints and what they're dealing with, right? And in doing so, again, some of the Jedi were really awkward about it, and they kind of felt out of place. We'll get into specifics in just a second, but all of this, you could almost see it playing, and it was kind of, I wouldn't say it was obvious in a bad way, but you almost were rooting for the fact, like, you wanted to see all these people and all these little relationships that were starting to build. You wanted that to mean something because they were so good, right? These interactions were so thoughtful and so interactive, and you could really feel for the people, the common folk, as well as the Jedi that were kind of going through it. And there were some of these were very heartwarming, touching stories that were happening. You wanted that to mean something. And I love that he did that. John Jackson Miller does that at the very end. All of those relationships that they built, and as trivial as they may have seemed, come back later on to really play a part, and everybody has a role kind of in saving Quinn, right? The planet that they're on, the planet. So I thought that was great. I really enjoyed it. I guess maybe let's talk about some of the individual relationships and some of the stuff that they did. I guess I'll, if you don't mind, I'll start with you. I mean, is there any one in particular that you either really enjoyed or were like, wow, this is not what I was expecting, or not where I thought it was going to go? Because I think I had kind of feelings for both of those, honestly.
Yeah, well, I do want to say, I think for me, like, one of the most powerful is, I actually didn't even mention this in my summary because it was just like, it wasn't going to be a summary anymore if I started talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
But my favorite was probably Yoda when
Yes.
he runs into Leal by chance in the street, who he knew back during the Grand Renewal.
He's a
And
Solistan who'd been around at the time.
yes. And so he finds out through conversation that his dad has been sick, and he's been, trying to work on that and figure out that situation, which has been a big challenge. And what ends up happening later on in part 2 is that Leal is attacked and hospitalized, and which, for reasons, but the significant part of this for me was that after Leal is hospitalized, Yoda goes to visit his father, Erwin, and he's going to try to set up a medical droid that Leal was about to purchase for his father to be taken better care of. And when Yoda goes, you can tell that Erwin is nearing death. And Yoda spends the whole day with him. He talks with him. He just kind of hangs out with him for a long time. And Erwin does eventually pass while Yoda
Mm-hmm.
is there. And the way that that was written, and just the way that Yoda was there to support him in those moments, it was just really beautiful and really powerful. So that really stood out to me a lot. And that's one of the amazing things about this book is, like, you and I can sit here and talk about all of our favorite silly moments, but then at the same time, we have like this really powerful, beautiful moment of Yoda being there to support someone who is dying. So
Yeah.
I just thought that was super cool.
Yeah, and the compassion that Yoda shows in that scene, especially at the very end when he literally spends the entire day with somebody who is dying, right? is just remarkable. It's very touching. It's very moving. It comes in a moment during the book when there's a lot of stuff that's just happened and still happening. So where he sticks it and how he pulls it off, I think, is just brilliant, honestly. And to kind of what really weighs emotionally on that scene is you've got Yoda who knows that his son, so Erwin's son, the guy that's dying, his son, Leon, is done some bad things. He was originally in charge of like tourism for Quinn. And because tourism really wasn't, Quinn, we probably should have kind of set the stage for what Quinn is in a state of kind of almost disarray. Like there's another planet called Keldoween that we've already mentioned. That one has kind of almost gotten overrun by gangs, and it's really kind of, it's starting to fall apart kind of thing. And Quinn is very conscious of that. They're just, the next planet over or whatever in the system. And so they don't want the same thing to happen to them. And there's definitely signs that really is starting to happen on Quinn. Because especially now, if the Jedi pull out, if they leave their outpost, then there's really no kind of guardian forces. There's not really like a local authority. Well, there is, but they don't really talk about it much. So they're worried that that's going to happen. And so this guy, Leon, the Celestin, because tourism was down, he decided that, I had to make money because my dad's dying. So he ends up going and selling drugs. And I know we're kind of jumping ahead here, but I think it's relevant to that scene where Yoda's spending some time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
His son gets stabbed by one of the gangs that's in the area, the Poison Blades, aptly named. Stab him in the chest, and unfortunately, he doesn't make it. They call the medics, and they don't get there in time. And he lives. No, he lives. Sorry,
he lives. He's in critical condition and not conscious,
right.
So they can't communicate with him for a while.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what really is important is when Yoda goes to see Ewan, he doesn't tell him any of this. He doesn't tell him that his son's been involved in drugs. He doesn't tell him that his son's been stabbed. He's actually he's having a conversation with him, and they're talking about his son and how proud he is, and how the things that he's going through. So all of that's weighing on his mind. And later on, Adi makes this comment to him and says, basically says, even though if you tell a lie in good truth, it's still a lie, that could come back and haunt you. And I don't think we've ever seen anything that comes from it. But Yoda having to weigh that on his shoulders the entire time, I think was really powerful. And also just the fact that, he took the time to spend with that dying person. And not only that, but like they even got to, so one of the things that's kind of going on in Quinn is every night there's a fire that's lit called the unquenchable fire, I think, or thirst. I forget what it is now. But that fire is being lit on Mount Sanctuary, which is kind of where the Jedi Temple is and the Jedi Outpost is every night. And one of his dying wishes was to see that light again. And so Yoda spends the time to witness that one last time before he passes. And that was kind of like the last thing he saw. But that was always something that he said as a person that's lived here for all these years. It was something that he looked forward to. Again, I don't know that I'm doing any justice here for this scene or even what that moment means. But it's just so.
There's
really
not
powerful.
a way to describe this scene, honestly, to do it justice, because I feel like just the way it was written, I mean, this is one of those things where it's like the writing, you just have to read it yourself, honestly, to really feel the power of that scene.
Yeah. I did enjoy like Evan Peel and him going and finding those students. You mentioned it. Like at one point they were like bullying him, like they picked him up. And like we're carrying him around, like, because he's very small. And another cool thing about that too was he's not the most I don't know, I wouldn't say attractive, but he's not pleasant to look like. Have you ever seen him? He looks like a Yoda at Wish kind of thing, and he's got this massive scar on his face. And he actually it's like he's very conscious of that. Right?
You know what he reminds me of in that scene is like, because these kids, I read these kids, to me, they seemed like they were middle schoolers, like
probably,
you know, like aggressive middle schoolers that are like kind of mean, but like also funny and, kind of onto something with what they're saying sometimes. He reminds me of that cool middle school teacher that knows how to deal with them.
Yes.
That was like the way that he totally comes across.
And that's actually how he kind of speaks to them, right? He actually talks to them in that way. He fights back by, I think he like sets off like the fire or the fire extinguishers or whatever, and the sprinklers come down and stuff. But it's just the patience that he has with the kids and the willingness to take them on and to really acknowledge that, look, these aren't bad kids. right? We then get the full story. And again, this is where the book does a really good job. We get the full story. They're not bad kids. It's just that the companies that would sponsor the schools and provide classes have left. And so not only are they not at school with teachers because teachers are leaving, they're not even getting fed. The meals are not coming to them. And so they're hungry. So you've got a Lord of the Flies kind of situation now going on in these school systems, right? And he acknowledged it. For him to see that again, and maybe it takes somebody like a Jedi to be able to kind of see all that and do something about it. But that was the whole point of the book. They were really getting into the weeds and getting into why some of these things were happening where, they wouldn't normally have done it had Qui-Gon not challenged him and had Mace Windu not decided to go to Quinn to kind of do those types of things. But his stood out to me as well. Of course, you've got like I think we talked about Ki-Adi-Mundi, who was he kind of went undercover at one point.
And before he goes undercover, he accidentally does couples therapy for these like random people that accost him when he's trying to buy a snow cone, that's a funny scene.
Yeah, and part of that is him not. The woman is coming to him and making up this thing about, and she called him like 3 different names because she didn't really catch his name the first time.
Yeah.
And, and it turns out that, she wants attention, right? And they get into this in the book. I swear to you, they get into this. The girl wants attention. And so he's counseling. He finds out from the guy, like, why aren't you giving her any attention? He's like, well, I've got a business and I've just hired on a Wookiee and my work, I'm very proud of my work. And I want to train the Wookiee up, but I don't want people to know it's a Wookiee because they're going to think that, my products aren't very good anymore or whatever. Or they're going to lose confidence in my products. And so I've been spending my nights training this Wookiee to take over so that, I have more time to do stuff. And so Ki-Adi-Mundi's like, okay, that's great. Now that you have this extra time, maybe you should put it back into your wife. Like she clearly wants attention and needs attention and is telling you that you love her. So here's, take that time to do something for her, not just yourself kind of thing. But that's the level at which they're doing these good turns, at the level they're doing like helping one person at a time kind of thing. And of course, later on, this guy plays a role in the protection of Quinn, right? Because he helped him. They come back and help him. He helps Ki-Adi-Mundi later down the road. So
yeah,
that's great.
All of the side stories, they do end up coming back later and helping Quinn in some way.
Yeah, which is great.
Yeah.
I want to talk about kind of the I guess Zill and her personal story. I think you mentioned it. There is another component of it. Yes, she goes to an orphanage. Prior to that, like she grew up on Quinn, or maybe it was Kelduin. I forget, one of the 2 planets. They're very close to each other, but she grew up on one of the planets, and her mom kind of lost her job when the Jedi. I think it was on Kelduin actually. Now that I say that, when the Jedi Council left, and she lost her job. And her mom was then relegated to go working in a mine to kind of make ends meet. And while she was in the mine, there was a mining accident which killed her mom, which then sent her to the orphanage. And so she had no family, right? The family that she now was trying to cling to was the orphanage and these 2 girls, 2 other girls that she had befriended. And this gets into, we actually hear this a little bit later, and I got a question for you on this one. But when the Jedi come, and we don't find out that it's Sifo Dyas until the very end, like literally almost at the very end, we find out that was a Jedi. And the council even acknowledges to Zillastra, they tell her, like, hey, we're so sorry that happened. Sifo Dyas was kind of crazy and, wasn't really in his right state of mind and probably should have never done that. We're very sensitive about, we don't just take kids. We actually kind of, there was a program that I had never heard of, honestly. Maybe that's ignorance on my part. But it sounded like there was a program so that when they did take kids like that, the families were then left to kind of go through a program to kind of heal and get past what that meant to have, their child taken away. None of that happened because Sifo Dyas was so focused on the future and that he was just kind of reckless in trying to make things happen for the Jedi Order. But throughout the book, I think I was starting to really wonder, like, if we would ever find out the 2 girls that were taken by the Jedi count by Sifo Dyas, whether or not they became Jedi. And Zillastra actually questions that at times in the book. Like she wonders if they were Jedi. And I think she was worried. I think one of her fears, and again, this is me probably interpreting things, but I think she was a little worried and concerned that at some point she might come face to face with her friends that are now Jedi. And the long and short of it is they don't know. it's kind of left open. Like, we don't know if they became Jedi or if they, didn't make it through the program or whatever. We don't know the fate of it. But I guess the question for you is, did you ever think the same thing? Did you ever think they would pop up in the book? And do you think there's any kind of a story there to kind of tell? Now, maybe not so much with Zoe because she's imprisoned at the very end of the book, but with the girls themselves.
Yeah, to me, they did kind of feel like anonymous characters. So I was not really surprised that we didn't see them again because it's like the mention was so short, and the fact that it was Cypher Diaz that found them made me be like, okay, I don't think we're gonna find out who these people even were just because of he was since Cypher Diaz was pretty unreliable. So yeah, I didn't expect them to come up, but I could definitely see that being an issue for Zalostra if they ever did,
Yeah.
because I mean, how would she reconcile her hatred for the Jedi with the only two friends that she had during a really tough time in her life?
Yeah. One Up versus CPU says, isn't Celestia's story a little bit like the mother's?
Yeah, it is. I mean, a similar thing happened to the mother, only it was the mother's sister. But yeah, the Jedi came and got her sister, but wasn't interested in her.
Yeah. And there were other stories too, I think both canonically and in Legends where, kids were separated and, it didn't work out either for the child that was taken or, for the families or those that were left to kind of reel with the loss. So I think, yeah, this is where the Jedi have always had, taken a knock in terms of their practices. I think this may have, I don't know if he was intentionally trying to kind of soften the blow a little bit, but it did seem like it was softened, knowing that they didn't literally just come and take your kid, that they thought through that process and what that did to the families. Because I think at least for me personally, I've always felt like, the kid was taken and they took really good care of the kid, but nobody ever kind of closed the loop on the family and kind of, other than saying, don't worry, this is for his own good or their own good, because, they're going to be a danger without having somebody train them and having this power kind of thing. It's nice to know that there was something more that was being done by the Jedi, not just kind of leaving them like that.
Well, and one thing that they say to Zalostra too is that we typically, I mean, Cypher Diaz,
Again, went
was
rogue.
a loose cannon. Yeah. Other than Cypher Diaz, we weren't supposed to take kids without the parents agreeing to it. They wouldn't just take the kid like without any sort of like, yes, I agree to this. I want them to be a Jedi. So, I mean, that was another aspect of it too, which is none of this should be being done like against the family's will.
Yeah. I think that was difficult too for her personally because her family was gone at that point. Her family was the orphanage. So, yeah, I don't know how much an orphanage would have said no. I think
it was just a nurse droid that was there. There wasn't any actual supervision. So, yeah.
It was one less mouth to feed, or two less mouths to feed. So, sure, yeah, do that, please.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about we've kind of skipped over and purposely we haven't talked about the Assurance. Okay, so the Assurance is a ship that is run by Captain Balo. Captain Balo is a character that John Jackson Miller wrote in a short story that appeared in Star Wars Insider. To kind of fast forward and spoil what happens to Balo, even beyond this book, at some point he actually joins the Imperial Navy. And in that short story, without getting into the guts of the story, he ends up dying at the hands of Vader. Okay, which sounds tragic, but there's the fact that he was brought back, right, is is a great little Easter egg first and foremost. But then even more cool is one of the cadets on the Assurance from early on is Veers, like Admiral Veers, Captain Veers that we see in Empire Strikes Back. He's a teenager at the time. This is where he got his first start being on the Assurance, and he pops out through this book a few times as the kid that constantly is stating the obvious. To kind of, there's a funny moment in there where Balo is upset with him because he keeps saying, everybody's watching. They're constantly attacking pirate ships, right? And there are at least, I think, 4 instances where they've come up on one of the pirate ships and the pirate ship suddenly just takes off into hyperspace. And Veers would turn to Balo and says, they've just taken off into hyperspace. And it was almost like a thank you, Captain Obvious kind of comment from Balo. But there's something about Veers that kind of pops up here and there. So the fact that he snuck him in there, I think, is brilliant. And of course, we all know Veers goes on to join the Imperial Navy as well. And he's the one that talks to Vader there at the very beginning of the Battle of Hoth. But what's even more kind of eerie, I think, is the idea that the Assurance and what Balo is doing and what Veers is doing at the end of the book, they're almost kind of starting a naval force of sorts. And it almost feels like a lot of the people there go on to join the Imperial Navy. And the cool, weird, the eerie part of this is that the person that's like petitioning or spearheading or sponsoring the establishment of this kind of naval force is Mace Windu. Like, he actually goes to bat for Balo and says, hey, let's get you more formalized. Let's get you the backing. Let's get you some cadets. Let's get you people to kind of, be a proper naval force. And yeah, it's Mace Windu. And it's weird that those guys went on to become like the Imperial Navy. A number of them did. So I don't know. It's a great little Easter egg. I know John Jackson Miller is pretty passionate about talking about the naval forces, and he's done it in a previous books, especially in that short story. But I don't know. Any thoughts around what we saw there?
Well, what was crazy to me about that is that if you miss the Easter egg, like I did, if you miss the Easter egg, then it seems like Mace is doing a good thing. Like, Captain Balo has been dissatisfied because he has this, like, difficulty with trying to get the resources that he needs to do what he needs to do. He's very frustrated with that. And Mace is trying to address a need that he has. And he's like, let's make this training program. And then, later on down the line, Kyla ends up joining the training program. And it seems like it's a good thing. Like, it seems like Mace is trying to help him out, and Balo's very appreciative. And it's like, cool. Like, they've got this setup now that Balo needs for the Republic to actually be able to fight crime better. So, like, if you miss the Easter egg, it seems like it's a good thing. But knowing what the Easter egg is, then that's when your view of it kind of changes, and you're like, oh, that's like, when I realized the Easter egg, I was like, oh my gosh, that totally changes the way you interpret that scene where they're getting that training program set up. So
Yeah.
I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, it definitely is. The intent is good, and it's part of the Empire. I mean, it's not. I think the intent is still good. Of course, that's not what Mace knew, and I don't think Balo was necessarily going down that route. But just to know that it's yet another thing that Palpatine is able to siege and take advantage of, right?
Mm-hmm.
And work his way into his masterful plans is really kind of cool.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about the maybe part 3 and kind of the big battle, if you will.
Okay, so with part 3, so now we know Deepa has figured out that Zalastra is going to attack the rest of the Jedi, and she's going to use the ceremony to do it. And so the Jedi, they debate this for a while about if they're going to still go forward with the ceremony that they've been planning or not. Eventually, they do decide, okay, we're going to go forward with it, but we're going to take some extra precautions. And this is where their new friends really come into play. So, like, they're using resources that their new friends have. Like, for example, one of the people that Ki-Adi-Mundi meets makes tents. And so they're going to have him make all these tents for the people so they can watch the ceremony from the safety of the tents, not in the arena where Zalastra is probably going to bomb. So there's all these little things like that that go into them trying to make the ceremony safe in the event of, if there is an attack, people are going to be okay. And so there's a lot of planning that goes into that. And when the ceremony actually happens, Deepa is able to foil Zalastra's voice-activated bomb, because Zalastra she set the lock to say, or when they say the Jedi stand with you, that's when it's going to open and go off. But what actually happens is they end up taking that line out, and Yoda says, with you, the Jedi stand. So then it doesn't unlock.
Broken. Yeah.
Right. And then so Zalastra was really mad, and Deepa actually has moved the case elsewhere. So when Zalastra goes underneath the stage looking for the case, her and Deepa end up having a confrontation. And right around that time, even though the bomb never goes off because Deepa has moved it, the rest of the criminals that Zalastra has gathered together, they all attack. So it's a bunch of pirate gangs that have joined forces to take over Quinn for themselves. And so they all attack, and it's the Jedi versus all of these pirate gangs that Zalastra has become the head of after assassinating all those other pirate bosses. And of course, like, the Republic is not helping at all, other than the Assurance, which does help. Other than that, the Republic's like, you guys got it. Good job. Y'all just keep doing what you're doing, and we will just be over here. So it's really just everybody on Quen has to figure this out themselves. And during this whole battle, that's when Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, they run into their three hooligan friends again. When they board Zalastra's ship, they run into these guys. And that's when they're like, okay, we keep running into these guys. And Qui-Gon's like, we got to figure out how to like use this because we're not running into them on accident at this point. This is the third time. And Qui-Gon ends up talking them into helping them out. And the way that he does this is he's like, Zalastra is trying to kill you, or she's trying to have you killed because the assignment that she gave them to do during the battle was just like a dumb assignment and like doesn't matter and would probably get them killed. And so Qui-Gon makes them aware of this because they weren't seeing it on their own. And so they do end up actually helping Qui-Gon out once they realize that Zalastra is doing them that way. And so they actually help the battle too. And at the same time that this is going on, Zalastra ends up going to Sanctuary Mount, that's the Jedi outpost. And she goes there because she puts together that that's probably where Deepa took the bomb. So Zalastra goes there, sets the bomb off, Sanctuary Mount explodes. And this is when Deepa and Kyla, because Kyla was with Zalastra when this happened, because Zalastra's holding Kyla hostage now to get to Deepa. Deepa and Kyla, they end up escaping in time in like a pretty crazy way. But they survive, and even Zalastra survives and is taken by law enforcement. And after the outpost explodes, that's when they all make the decision. They're like, okay, we're not going to close the outpost, but we are going to increase Jedi presence on Quen to help make sure that everything's good here. So the Jedi are successful in defeating the pirate gangs. And they also make the decision that they're not formally closing the outpost. It just no longer is having this building aspect to it. And then that takes us to the end of part 3.
Okay. Yeah, and this is where it all comes together, especially with the like you said, the people helping out. Everything from the tents that you mentioned that they helped out, put those together. You know, we talked about, I think it was Tien Sacy and Plo Koon kind of befriended somebody who had like a taxi organization that became pivotal in the battle, because anytime the Jedi or anybody needed to get anywhere, Plo Koon was like, he's basically a dispatcher, like a taxi dispatcher. He was sending the taxis out to pick people up and move people to safety and move Jedi wherever they needed to go, right, to kind of be able to strategically attack or defend wherever these attacks were popping up. There was also the one of the, I guess we haven't talked to her about enough, but there's a moment in there where Eth Koth, he befriends, I think it's her Anissa?
Anissa, yeah.
Yeah. And she was kind of like I think I kind of picked her up as maybe like a thief, maybe a prostitute. I don't know where.
You know who she reminded me of is Kira.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. Very similar kind of archetype as a Kira.
Yes. That's a great word for it. Yeah, it's like the same kind of archetype as Kira.
Yeah, kind of in it for herself, willing to manipulate whoever she needed to, kind of thing. And they had this very sincere conversation earlier on. Again, when he's kind of going, like, we said earlier he was in charge of like going around and, when they got to Quen, he kind of took up the same role he was doing back on Coruscant, which was inventory and items. Okay. And at one point they realize, like, I think it's Yaddle and someone else realizes, like, okay, we need to relieve him. He's been doing this entire time. And so they send him off and he's like, well, I don't know where to go. And he just kind of wanders off to, I think the casino barge that's there. Mm-hmm. And that's where he meets Nisa. And they have a very interesting conversation. Like, I walk away from this book and I do wonder if Koth felt like, well, I think Anissa liked him. Like, I think she liked him, like, sincerely liked him, and
she was disappointed that he like wasn't interested.
Like, wasn't interested. But I think so. The first encounter that they have, I don't think that he was. I think he was still kind of playing by the book. But once he left her, and then she reaches out to him at the very end here when this whole battle's going on, right before, like the night before, she actually contacts him, and because she kind of runs around in these dark circles, she ends up tipping off a lot of the plans that Zalastra had already set for all of these different rival gangs. Like, they had all this stuff in mind. They were going to, sicken the police forces within the space station, right? Well, she found out about that, told Koth, and then Mace Windu that morning went and thwarted that before it could ever happen. Yarrow Poof is then dispatched, again, from information that they got from Anissa, to go stop a plan to poison the police barracks. So they were going to poison all the police officers so that, law enforcement couldn't show up. And then there was another thing, I think, where they had, the Tasty Comet was a vendor that sold like snow cones or whatever else. And they had planted all of these grenades and blasters within every one of these little, because imagine everybody's coming right to this big festival and they're going to have all kinds of vendors and stuff, right? And so they had planted all the blasters and like thermal detonators and grenades and stuff inside these Tasty Comet kind of carts. And they sealed the carts on them without the criminals, without the pirates knowing. And so when the time came for them to open that up and start opening fire, they couldn't get any of these things open, right? All of this, and this is again where it comes back to, where like, again, all those relationships that they fruited and started off at the very beginning came back to help Quinn at the end. But going back to Koth and Anissa, that was a great example of, one person who had a lot of knowledge and had a lot of circles. But I did walk away at the very end. I got to say this, at the very end of that, when she's like talking to him, I think she says that she's going to go on and do something else. And I think she gives him his number and he accepts the number. Like, he's not, I kind of walked away thinking, like, I don't know, he would probably never leave the jet. Well, he doesn't leave the order and he dies, unfortunately. Spoiler alert. But it did feel like there was a moment there where he might have been tempted. Like, he might have been like, maybe there is a life of me outside the council with Anissa, because she was very, very interested in him, and not like in a very honest way, like a very endearing way. Like, it felt like she wanted to be a part of his world because of the world that she was living in. And I think she found him attractive. I don't know. It was an interesting relationship.
I do think she was hitting on him, but the way I interpreted it was he was kind of like, okay, ma'am, like, I'm talking to you because I'm a Jedi and I'm trying to help you. Not like she was being creepy or anything like that, but just like, I did feel like he was kind of like, I'm giving you my comm number in case you need help or whatever, not for like chit chatting.
It wasn't like a text me kind of thing, no?
Yeah, I don't know. I felt, that was kind of how I read it, but I could see how someone could draw multiple conclusions from that conversation.
Someone who tends to ship everybody. Yeah.
I usually ship everybody too, so I don't blame you.
Yeah. So that was, I guess, going back to the battle itself. What was interesting is Zalastra the entire time was so confident that even though things weren't happening the way they were supposed to, she kept making excuses as to why. Like, it was almost like she was in denial that things weren't happening the right way, right? Whether it was the bomb didn't go off. Oh, it didn't go off. I'm not really sure why. Oh, the people, I don't hear anything coming from all of the different groups. It must be because they're so busy and they're not communicating the way they're supposed to, right? They had already cut communications, and so she couldn't hear that as well. But it was that overconfidence. And I actually felt bad for her at one point because, her plans were thwarted by the local citizens, something that she didn't account for. It was very similar to, again, like a Palpatine kind of thing, where he never accounted for the stinking Ewoks to be the kind of the people that turned the tide. But we had a very similar situation here where everything that she planned for was certainly accounted for, but that X factor and what really changed it was, again, the people of Quinn and what they did.
Yeah. She definitely didn't see that coming. And I think part of it too was, it's like, the cards didn't tell me that this was going to happen. Like, because she kept, as things were going wrong, there were times that she kept thinking about what the cards were saying, which I thought was interesting as well.
Yeah. Let's see if I had anything else I kind of wanted. This is where we got the scene with Yoda and Yaddle. I didn't mention this earlier, and I think it might have been in this section in part 2 or part 3, but there was one moment in here where Yaddle was on a speeder bike, and it wasn't like a normal speeder bike. It was a mini speeder bike. It was like a little kid speeder bike. And I thought, oh my God, I got to see what that looks like.
Then the guy's like, no child, what does he say? Like, no child vehicles allowed or whatever. And she's like, are you kidding me?
She was great in this book. Like, I love that we gotten so much Yaddle, especially, with Tales of the Jedi and now this book, but she was just a standout character for me.
Yeah, for sure.
This is also at one moment, again, not to, and we're kind of getting short on time here, not to get into the story. Again, we could sit here and talk about all these stories ad nauseum. But
I know.
there was one moment in there where Oppo, I think was it Oppo who was with the
Yes,
Oroko, with the creature?
yes, the Orokos, which they're pretty much whales, I
That's how I
think.
interpret it too, like whales. But
Yeah.
it was like a Star Wars Rebels moment with Ezra, right? Where he
Yes.
calls upon them and they end up kind of knocking over the sail barge and
The
kind of
main
turning the tide
comms
there.
ship, yeah.
Right. That was the main comm ship that what's her name, that Zill was counting on, right? So that was kind of the almost command and headquarters type thing. And there's a great moment in there where he's almost like riding this thing, Opal Rancisis, and you can, and he's, of course, he's that snake looking guy, right? So you can visually see what that would look like. It's just a fascinating scene. But that was something, again, earlier on when there was a moment where the Jedi actually helped the Oroko, without getting into the details, right? They helped the Oroko, and that came back to help them a little bit later. So it wasn't just the citizens of Quinn, but it was also the denizens or the animals or whatever, the creatures of Quinn that came to help them at the very end as well.
Yeah, I loved that there was also, I mean, anytime we get to see a Jedi use the Force to communicate with an animal, I just think that's so cool. So I'm glad that that was also a little moment that we got in here.
Yeah. I forgot to mention this. I tease it, and just to kind of come back to it, just to throw it out there. But I had said that there was one Jedi who said, "What would Qui-Gon do?" During that moment, and that was actually Kia Di Mundi who said that. It was actually during that dispute when he was trying to figure out, like, what should I do here when I got these two people quarreling over, a lover's quarrel essentially. What would I do? Kind of, what would Qui-Gon do? And that's when he decided to take the approach of, okay, let me talk to them and let me find out
Yeah.
what's going on with them and see if there's something I can do and help them, remediate this. So that was great. All right, I think let's. Why don't we move on to the last part of it, which is kind of like the big wrap up and the epilogue, of course. But let's talk about part 4.
Yeah, so part 4, so we do find out that Leal is okay. He survived the attack and he's super apologetic. He feels very guilty because he knew that getting involved with the pirate gangs was wrong, but he felt like he didn't have a choice. And so he's apologizing to Yoda, and Yoda is very understanding. He's like, you're apologetic, and that's the main thing. So they end on a good note. And we also have, yeah, this is in addition to that. So after that scene, we have a lot of the Jedi's plot lines are wrapping up in this section. So pretty much all of the relationships that they've started and everybody that they've been helping in this section, we see them coming to a more long-term solution for these people. Another thing that we see in part 4 as well is we find out that so the mystery of the library books that Eth Toth was trying to figure out when he was doing inventory and couldn't find them on a wild goose chase for a while, and then ends up kind of having to give up. What ends up happening? We find out in part 4 that where those library books went is Palpatine was actually having Seneschal Vo send some of them to him and then destroy others. And it was, of course this was supposed to be like covered up, but the Jedi were starting to catch on. And also now that the outpost has been destroyed, all of the library books are gone anyway. So Palpatine really doesn't need Seneschal Vo anymore. And so the two of them do have a call in this part of the book where Palpatine is pretty much kind of getting on to him about, you didn't destroy the books, you didn't cover this up good enough, pretty much. And he's explaining, he's kind of talking about like the gravity of why that's so bad. And there's a moment where Seneschal Vo is like, "Why are you telling me all this?" And Palpatine's like, "I'm not telling you, I'm telling him." And then Seneschal Vo turns around and it's Darth Maul behind him.
Yeah.
And that was crazy. I didn't expect that at all.
On that part, let me just, if I could, that was a great scene because, like you said, one, it wasn't expected at all. Like I thought we were kind of done with Palpatine because we had left Coruscant. But the way that starts, it's in the epilogue, and it starts off not only some of the nuances of that scene is he was having Seneschal Vol like go to a florist, go to the annex of a florist in the back room of that, right? So it was super secret that he was doing this. And what was cool is like you could see Palpatine, like his voice was changing. At first it was like, oh, I consider you a friend, etc., but I'm really not happy with you. And then it turned into, slowly it migrated or evolved into Sidious talking to him.
Right.
And then it evolves even further to where Sidious is no longer talking to Vol. He's actually talking to Darth Maul, who's behind him. And Vol asks, like, you know, is that for me? Like, what are you talking about? Because he starts talking about no worries, you know, the Trade Federation, the Republic, all of this is in order. And Vol says, why are you telling me this? And he says, I'm not telling you, I'm telling him. And that's when Darth Maul appears.
Yeah.
And he turns around, and I think the line, it's kind of funny. I think Vol says he saw the Zabrak with the painted tattoos on his face and didn't think he was a florist. And that's like, that's how the scene ends. And you got to think, I mean, at that point, Vol was pretty much dead.
Yeah.
But what's cool here is that not only were, and by the way, not only were there books in the sanctuary, but there were data pads. Earlier on, there's a reference that Avar Kriss had left one of her data pads or something there as well, right? But there was all this Jedi knowledge, and this speaks to what Palpatine was doing. He was trying to, even though he wasn't necessarily in power as the Emperor, prior to that, he was already doing things to gather as much knowledge and as much insight and take away as many of the tools and anything that was available to the Jedi to have an advantage from them. He was doing all that through other places. And then I started thinking, well, like, this is one place. I know there were probably other Jedi temples and other outposts where this was happening. So you had to think he probably had other relationships and had these kind of, under the table dealings with people like Seneschal Vol in order to do the same thing. So, I mean, again, it's just masterful in a lot of ways. And again, I love the fact that they are able to come back and kind of recontextualize that stuff and kind of give us more exposition on exactly what Maul was doing or what Palpatine was doing prior to the Phantom Menace.
Yeah, and that's the scene that earlier I was saying. It feels like it was just a little treat because it's really not super related to the overall theme of this book, but it was exciting to get a little peek at what Palpatine's doing in a Maul cameo. I mean, who's not excited about a Maul cameo,
Exactly.
So
Yep.
So that was a fun scene, even though I did feel bad for Seneschal Vo, I'm not gonna lie. Even though he was, he made a deal with the devil, but I do feel bad that Maul killed him.
Yeah. Yeah.
But so after that, we do have the epilogue where we have the training program that we talked about a little bit earlier on the assurance that Mace has the idea that he presents to Captain Balo to make this training program, which at the time sounds like it's going to be good because it sounds like he's helping Captain Balo get what he needs. But if you know about that character, then it's kind of a little eh. And Kyla also joins, and it sounds like it's going to be a good thing for Kyla to be part of this program because it's actually giving her a trajectory in life. She's not just going to be having to go from gang to gang just to survive. She's actually going to have some structure in her life. So I do think it's good that Deepa got her set up with this program. And Qui-Gon also helps speaking of people getting better trajectories in life, Qui-Gon helps the three hooligans get an actual job. So now instead of just stealing ships all the time, they're going to have a real job where they're going to be doing work, and they seem excited about that. So that's good for them. And then the final scene is when we have Yoda, Qui-Gon, and Obi-Wan are talking, and Yoda's reporting to them that the trip was a huge success. And it turned out that Qui-Gon was right. Everybody really learned something from this. And it seems like it was just good for the council as a whole to get involved in something like this. And it's also bringing a lot of really good influence back into Quinn from the Jedi. And in that scene, we also have another conversation about attachment where we get that great line from Qui-Gon where he's talking about how there's a difference between the expectation put on Jedi with attachments and what the Force actually wills. And because Obi-Wan's kind of questioning, like, why is it that Deepa was, sticking her neck out for Kyla so much if we're not supposed to be attached? And that's Qui-Gon's response is, what Deepa did was best for Kyla, and that's the will of the Force too. So that was just a really great, just one of the many conversations that we have in this book, that's a really great conversation between Jedi about what is the will of the Force and how should we interpret that. This conversation between them three, I think, was one of the highlights of those types of conversations.
Yeah, it really was. And prior to that, there's another great moment from Qui-Gon where he says, "I'm not insubordinate. I'm unorthodox. The insubordinate are ignored. The unorthodox are heard." And I think that speaks to like we always talk about Qui-Gon in the light of being kind of like a rebel, an outcast, right? We hear the line from Kenobi, telling him during the movies, like, you could be on the council if he'd stop basically bucking and pushing against them, but he really is kind of challenging them. It's not insubordination. It's just first and foremost, I think what we've learned from the comics, especially, and Master and Apprentice, is he is kind of like a way seeker in that sense. He follows whatever the Force tells him to do. And sometimes it gets like, every Jedi walks their own path, to kind of call back to what we learned in the High Republic. That's first and foremost. He's kind of following the living Force. He's following that to a T. And so sometimes it doesn't necessarily align with what they want him to do. And by going to the Jedi Council, I think he's acknowledged, like, if I do that, I don't know that I can really in good conscience continue to do what I'm doing now, right? The Force really wants me to do this kind of work, and I can't be on the council because of that. Again, not insubordinate, just unorthodox, the way he goes about things, which I thought was awesome and brilliant. I like the way that everybody kind of got I would say for the most part, a happy ending. Our antagonist gets locked up, and they kind of give her Sabbath cards back. And it turns out, she's doing the same thing with the cards and flipping them over and stuff. And it's almost like the Joker from Batman, if you will, in some ways. So there's probably some, and I know, by the way, John Jackson Miller, as of this podcast, he just got signed on. This is in a total aside. He's doing a sequel to the Batman movie from 1989 or 86 or whatever it was. He's doing a sequel to that. He's writing it. He announced it just last week. So I know he's a huge Batman fan, and I couldn't help but think the way Zalastra was talking about the cards and the way she used them. I mean, she at one point stuck one of the cards in the mouth of the Jedi that she killed, which is what Deepa was after. That's exactly what the Joker would do, right? He'd leave his calling card, if you will, kind of thing. So definitely some parallels there that did not get past me. But that was great. I liked the way that Kyla was able to kind of have a second chance. I loved that Balo called her up, like in front of everybody, right? She just joins his academy, but he calls her up and is basically kind of in her face, grilling her, kind of, if you will, almost kind of in a military sense. But he's doing it so that she can tell everyone, without necessarily telling everyone, that she has experience, right? He's almost setting her up to be, kind of take her first step on the right foot, if you will, and establish herself with the street cred that she has. Because we haven't talked about her enough, but she's like another one of these characters that's well beyond, like, super wise and certainly adept beyond her age. I mean, she's only 12 years old, and she's got, she's got all kinds of confidence flowing out of her, right?
She's been through a lot, yeah.
She's been through a lot. She's grown up really quickly, and she's certainly valuable to the ship. So I like that he called her out and tried to do that and kind of almost save face, if you will, for her. It was really a nice little move that he did there. So, again, none of these characters are bad. Like Balo, Veers isn't necessarily a bad character, even though they both end up on the in the Imperial Navy. It's just, over time, things change and situations change, and, it just speaks to the power of the Empire. I do wonder now, like, I don't know that we'll ever get a story, a sequel to this, but there are characters like Kyla who I wonder, like, what happens to them? Like, I want to know what that story is. Like, what happens after she, spends her time on the Assurance and under these new forces? Does she go on? Does she join the Empire as well? I don't know. She's a new character, so maybe we'll find out at some point.
I mean, she does care about Deepa a lot, so I don't think she ever becomes a Jedi hater.
True.
So I think we can at least say that.
Right. I don't think so either. I think that's certainly safe to say. Let's see. I'm going to see if there was anything else. There's a great moment there at the very end where Yaddle is talking to Morna, and I don't know if we've mentioned Morna, but she's a character who was brought in to kind of help talk to the people when the battle was going on. She was in charge of, like, basically Yaddle hands her the microphone and is like, here, go talk to these people get them to talk about and celebrate what they love about Quinn, kind of thing. And it really was to kind of settle everybody down, like she was a calming voice, if you will, for the people of Quinn. But later on, and she felt like she had never really, like she was really unhappy with what had happened, really unhappy with her life, kind of thing. But there's a great moment there where Yaddle tells her tomorrow's suffering doesn't exist today. Today's suffering does. It's another interpretation of, live in the now, but not at the expense, or be mindful of the future, but not at the expense of the present, kind of thing. So that going back to that same lesson that Qui-Gon teaches Obi-Wan from the movies, I thought was great.
Well, and Morna's response to that was good too. She was like, "This week I feel like what I did really mattered, and I want next week to feel that way too."
Yeah, and Yaddle tells her, "Okay, take that. Like, go on, tell the story of the battle here on Quinn, and tell the people the individual stories, right?" And of course, we don't ever see that happen, but I think it's a really neat idea that now she's empowered to go out and report on all these stories and make everybody known. Certainly document it in some way so that it lives on kind of forever. Let's see. Wanted to touch on. I think we've talked about just about everything from my notes. You mentioned that last dialogue with Obi-Wan and Yoda and Qui-Gon Jinn. I want to just quickly talk about Qui-Gon Jinn in this book, because I know we've been talking about him, and of course we've been gushing about him. But for anybody, just to kind of set expectations, he's really not in the book as much as you think he is. It's primarily like, it almost feels like Deepa Billaba is kind of the main Jedi, and for the most part, it's kind of her story and what it feels like, her attachment to. I don't think we've talked about this, but she becomes very attached to Kyla, and there's several moments in there where she doesn't do anything and allows the Lastra to leave and escape, because she's worried about what's going to happen to her. But Qui-Gon's not in this as much as you would think. Same thing with Obi-Wan. When they are there, they actually never fight that I recall. They ignite their lightsabers, but I don't think they ever actually use them at any point, because they're always with the idiots or doing something else.
Yeah.
Which is fine.
Although I will say Qui-Gon, even though he's not on the page, his presence is felt, because, this whole trip is because of what he said.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely, for sure. Like, he is definitely a part of this book, a part of the narrative in a lot of ways. But it is kind of about, I guess most of the other Jedi, with Deepa kind of being that through line. Again, the call back to Rebels at the very end of this, there is a nice little conversation that happens with Deepa and Mace Windu. And it's what's beautiful is, and again, this is me interpreting it to some extent, but she's a member of the council, and she ends up telling Mace Windu, now that this experience is all over and behind us, I'm actually considering bringing on a Padawan, right? And to know who her Padawan is going to become was just beautiful. And to think that inspiration, the motivation that gave her to bring on a Padawan was Kyla, is kind of special in my opinion.
And Mace says to her, he says, "The Force will look kindly on whoever you choose."
Yeah, that was the line that I was looking for. I have it here somewhere. But yeah, it's just a really great moment to think that she did that. And he even tells her, like, you're a member of the council. It's not really something that you would do, but she felt very passionate about it. Like, I think I should take a Padawan on. All right, the Force is calling me to take a Padawan. Of course, that would become Kanan Jarrus. So. Great stuff there. I love that part of it as well. Let's see. I think that's, I don't know. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I wanted to get out there, and they have all these like stupid trivial things still. I
feel like, I do feel like it's worth saying again that there's so much that I feel like we haven't even had time to mention that is in this book. That's just really great. It's just like, there's so many little details and little side stories, and I don't know, just cool little things that to talk about all of them is probably not possible. But yeah, I mean, I feel like we just can't do it justice no matter what we say.
Yep. Let's see. One up says, do you think there's any connection between the pirates here and the Nihil?
I don't know if there's a connection, but I did see similarities in the way that the pirates are like, we gotta take over this planet,
Yeah, and I think there's There's at one point where Zill she mentions that there's kind of like this golden opportunity that every pirate gang is after, which is not only becoming the head of a pirate organization, but somehow collecting and bringing everybody together under one kind of organized crime kind of syndicate thing, if you will.
Mhm.
And so in that regard, it kind of feels the same, but I think that's just normal piracy, if you will, for that kind of transcends that. But there was nothing in here that kind of alluded to like the Nihil specifically. I forget, someone else asked if there was anything in here from the Acolyte. Was there anything in here that would signal what we could possibly see in the Acolyte? I didn't get anything. It felt like this was kind of an independent story, so kind of
There are High
standing.
Republic references.
Yes, there
but
definitely are.
Not any that seem specific to the Acolyte.
No.
Only.
Yeah, there were more trivial or kind of little Easter egg things, but nothing that alluded to like, hey, this is what we can expect from, the Acolyte or anything in Phase 3 of the High Republic. I guess maybe the last question to go back to, I guess the one that was thrown out there earlier, I forget who it was. It might have been at One versus CPU. Who's your favorite council member in the book, Lauren?
Oh my God. Okay. Well, let me ask a clarifying question. Is it particularly in this book, or who is my favorite council member after reading this book?
Oh, I interpret
You know what
that
I
as
mean?
I kind of and maybe this is wrong, but and if he's here, he can clarify. I read this as who was your favorite council member after reading this book, kind of thing.
Because I mean, I feel like I can't change my answer from Yoda. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's always been Yoda. I don't know if I can change that, but Yariel Poof is like a shining star in this book for me. So, but I don't know if he beats out Yoda. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah, he's saying yeah after the book. Who's your
yeah,
favorite character?
I think it's still Yoda. I don't think Yariel Poof has passed up Yoda, but
Yeah, I mean it's hard because Yoda arguably has the most powerful moment in the book.
right. And before I read this book, I would have said Yoda too. So
Okay.
that's why my answer is a little, yeah.
Yeah, I think I would probably say the same. I think a standout character for me is probably Jarl Poof as well, just for his comedic role, some of the things he says, and I would throw Kia Di Mundi. I mean, the three of them together, like I said at the very beginning, was just comedy gold, and it's all comedic reasons. Like I don't think none of them really had a really deep conversation, honestly.
I do think
you're.
you know what? I did have a line from Yariel Poof where he says, "What is being cognizant if not talking to people?"
Yeah, yeah,
That's kind of deep.
It's kind of deep and eye-opening moments.
Yeah.
But for the
Thought that
most
was
part,
a
it felt
good
like they
point.
were in there just to kind of subvert expectations about who we thought they were. They certainly are those people, but again, in the environment that they were in, they were totally different people than I was expecting, and it was really great as well. Mundi's, again, I already talked about the snow cone incident. That
Yeah.
was really good. I can't remember the line, but there was a line when he's like, "I had a snow cone just over there, not too long ago," kind of thing. It's like so random, and I don't know.
Yeah.
It's funny that he said something like that. Yeah, I would have to say yeah. I'm gonna probably say Yoda definitely because of the moment that he had, but I really did like the other two. Sorry, I don't want to probably highlight.
It's a hard question.
Well, then I like Deepa's relationship with Kyla.
Mhm.
And I like the way she stuck to the attachment, but was never crossed the line. Right? It felt like she was always doing the good thing that needed to be done. And then the one we haven't really talked about is like Adia, like some of the like her and her combat skills. Like they really
Mhm.
showcase that and how incredible she was at, even though she was doing clerical work, right? Sitting there with Palpatine and talking about boots and colors of paint and whatever else. The fact that she would do anything for the order, and she was an amazing combatant, like she was showcased as an amazing combatant, was just something that I don't know that, I mean, you expect it, but to be acknowledged by her peers and to see it happening on the page, I thought was really cool and a great another moment for her.
Yeah. It's different when you actually see it happening instead of being told or assuming it.
So what about you as for Windu? Like, I know you're a big Mace Windu fan. How did he come out for it? I mean, he had his moments and we didn't really talk about, he was kind of put to the side a lot. He spent a lot of time on the Assurance and with Captain Balo. Wasn't necessarily in the thick of things. I mean, he had a kind of a cool moment at the very end. where he saves a day in some ways. But yeah, I don't know. What did you think? How did you feel about what John Jackson Miller did with his character?
I mean, I liked what he did with his character because I feel like he is still very Mace in the way that he's very by the book because he sees the value of being by the book. He's To me, Mace is not just by the book just to be a stickler. He's The reason he's by the book is because he recognizes the importance of having the structure. And I feel like you do see that in, like, especially in the way that Mace kind of, I don't know if confront is the right word, but he brings up to Deepa like, "Hey, kind of seems like you're struggling with attachment a little bit." The way that he brings that up to her, you do get that sense, but he's not overly harsh about it. He's just direct. And I really liked that presentation of Mace is because to me, the way that his character was coming through in this book is that he was really trying to do the right thing. He can just be direct in the way that he presents his views. And so, yeah, I mean, I liked the way that he was presented in this. I mean, of course, I would have liked to have gotten a little bit more insight into his thought processes, but I think that that's coming and, in another
Future
book later
books.
this year. Yeah. So I think I'll get that eventually. I'm always hoping for like a Mace Windu redemption story where we really get a lot of insight into like what's going on in his head.
Yeah.
So we didn't get that in this book, but I think that that's still coming.
Yeah, I think I would co-sign all that. I liked what he did. He had a great role. I like that there were moments when he gave his lightsaber to Deepa to use, and to think that she was out there wielding the purple lightsaber. I thought that was really neat. But yeah, I mean, he kind of, I wouldn't say he played a secondary role, but he wasn't kind of the main focus necessarily
Yeah.
in this book. Even though he had a big role, it was again mostly out there on the outskirts of space and running around with Balo and
He did have a
butting
couple cool
heads.
moments though.
Yeah, yeah, definitely did. Okay. Well, again, the lobber, by the way, just to kind of, we talked about, to tease it, the lobber was one of the goons. He was called the lobber because he used to like to lob grenades, which seems so, obvious, but I mentioned it. And
That
I
is
wanted to
confirmed,
I
yeah.
wanted to follow through on that little teaser as well. But yeah, overall, I would say great book. As much as I said, like, it doesn't really, it's not a action oriented book. It's not a book that's focused deeply on the mythology of the Jedi or the Jedi Order or the Force necessarily, except the living Force, of course. But from the angle, or the living Force, of course, but from the perspective and the angle of doing good deeds for people and helping one person at a time and living in the moment, living in the present and not being worried about the future or the past. That's really what this book's about. And again, to kind of summarize what it does, that dehumanization, like the humanization, I should say, of the Jedi, grounding them, giving them purpose and giving them an opportunity to be servant leaders and to do good turns and to just get to talk to people and see them do amazing things that we know they're capable of doing, but then also aided with the same people that they befriended and the same people that they helped, is really what this book's about. And I think all of that does a really good job, an incredible job, of painting the Jedi in the light that I think we expect them to be in, and I think that we always hope them to be. So I've said this before, like when I was posting on social media before we could talk about it. This book came at like the right time. I think we needed this book, especially right now, because there has been a lot of chatter and discourse around whether the Jedi are bad, are they horrible? And they're not horrible people. We definitely see that in this book. So it did a good job for them. But your kind of final thoughts on the book?
Yeah, I totally agree with that we see that the Jedi are people, so they're not perfect, they're not beyond making mistakes, but they are the Jedi, which means that they put their lives into really trying to help in some way. Now, whether that's the cosmic force versus the living force, that's the debate that's raised in this book, but they really want to help the galaxy. And it's important to me that that stays consistent. And I feel like this book really, really did a good job of like reestablishing that. Because I mean, yeah, it's like we've talked about. Like, I don't want to get off track of, the Jedi were rotten to the core all this time. I just don't see it that way.
No,
I
no.
don't want it to be that way. And I really liked that this book really kind of drove home the fact that no, the Jedi were people, so they're not perfect, but they were really, really trying to do the right thing. So to me, that's perfection.
Yep. So go out, pick the book up. There's the audiobook as well. I haven't heard I've heard good things about the audiobook. It was Mark Thompson does the reading for that book. So he does all these voices really well. I've heard him do the voices before. So pick up the audiobook. I think you and I both have the what do we picked up the I picked up the Goldsboro and the Inkstone. Did you get both or did you just get the Goldsboro?
I just got the Goldsboro.
So the Goldsboro,
I had to choose. Yeah. I was like, I can't have 3 versions. Come on.
I've got 2 here. I've got like the one behind me here. I've got this one. Then I bought another one for the book plate. And then I've got 2 more coming because I picked up the Goldsboro, which has the green sprayed edges. And then I picked up the Inkstone, which I had to get the black spray edges because they look cool. So, but yeah, however you find this book, whether it's e version or not, pick it up. It's definitely worth it. He does a great job. How does this book rank for you, I guess, against all the other ones that he's done so far? Or just the books in general? I think you threw out the gauntlet that this might be your favorite.
So, okay, I always say that my all-time favorite Star Wars novel is Master and Apprentice, and honestly, I think this one might be right neck and neck with that.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, which for me to say that is a big deal. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a really good book. It's definitely up there. I told Jonesy that this is probably my favorite book from him, from John Jackson Miller, and to think that he's come back and written this, this many years later, like, I don't know, when's this guy writing the next book? Like he just needs to keep writing Star Wars books because he gets it. He knows these characters really well.
Yeah.
He's great. He's a masterful storyteller. So I was really excited. I can't recommend the book enough, especially if you, again, like the Jedi Council and especially this era of Star Wars. It's a great book to have. Okay. Did you take the names of the people that were with us tonight?
Yes, I did.
All right, then you got some shout outs.
Yeah, so thanks to everyone who joined us in the live chat tonight. We had One Up for CPU, JJ Skywalker, Music Train, My Star Wars Guys, Alex, Ghost Money, and Noah Rogers. So thanks y'all for coming out.
Yep. Again, we do this on YouTube. If it's not a Patreon show, we're always on YouTube to record these episodes. Of course, sub to the podcast if you don't mind, but like, subscribe on YouTube, comment down below if you'd like. We'll get to those. As you do so, head out to cantinacast.com/YouTube. Programming notes this week, we've got the Bad Batch. So tomorrow, I should say, let me back up. Tomorrow, we're going to be opening all kinds of Star Wars Unlimited cards for the first time and trying to see how much money I've wasted in doing so. But we're going to have Greg on from Rebel Base Card as well. So that'll be myself, Jonesy, and Greg. We're going to run him through a bunch of Star Wars questions and have a lot of fun just opening cards and seeing which versions we get. Then let's see, Thursday we'll be back to do the Bad Batch breakdown, and then of course we've got Sunday with the Way Station and a whole bunch of Patreon episode as well. So plenty of Star Wars coming up, and we're officially going to start kicking off all our Phantom Menace 25th anniversary shows here very shortly, especially by the time we get to May 4th. So lots and lots of more programming still yet to come. Okay, with that, I'm going to roll credits, and we'll see you guys tomorrow for the card unveiling.
You're still listening? Wow, that's amazing. Well, I'm here to give you the disclaimer. Normally we do a big, long, drawn-out disclaimer thing saying what's what and who's what and all that other stuff, but I think you guys kind of know that Lucasfilm and Disney have no affiliation with us at all, and we have none with them. We talk about Star Wars, which is their property, and all that other good, fun stuff, but I think you can tell which is our stuff and which is their stuff. If you can't, well, then send a lawyer to send an email to me, and I'll be glad to chat with them. Other than that, you know what's what, so that's your disclaimer.